My name is Margaret Hale. I'm 38 years old, and the email that ended my family fit on a single line. I read it at 5 in the morning, Singapore time, on the 31st floor of a hotel, 9,000 miles from the seaside cottage my husband and I built with our own hands. My parents had sold my house, to settle my sister's gambling debts. The email ended with a question. You didn't need it anyway, right? I didn't reply. I didn't scream into a pillow. I made one phone call instead, and then another. And what the real estate agent told my parents 3 days later is a moment my mother still calls the misunderstanding. The county prosecutor called it something else. Stay with me. You'll want to hear what my parents didn't know. Where family secrets come to light and quiet women find their voice. If you've ever been the responsible one, the one everybody leans on and nobody ever asks about, this story belongs to you too. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Let me tell you what they sold, so you understand what the email actually said. Windward Cottage sits on a bluff outside Beacon Harbor, Maine, on land my grandmother left to me, by name, in a will she wrote in her own careful hand. Ken and I built the house ourselves, weekends and vacations, 6 years of them. I'm a structural engineer. He's a contractor. Our honeymoon fund became a foundation pour. I calculated every load path. He framed every wall. In 2018, a nor'easter took half the unfinished roof into the sea, and we started that section over without discussing it, because that's who we are. Ken hand-carved the newel post at the bottom of the stairs and set our initials into it, M and K, deep enough to outlive us. My grandmother's china hutch went in the dining room, the one she fed 4 kids out of through 2 recessions. And here's the part that matters. My family used that house. Every summer, 2 weeks in July, my parents in the good bedroom, my sister Delia on the porch daybed, lobster rolls and board games, everyone welcome. I never once locked that door against my family. It never occurred to me I'd need to. My dad taught me to read blueprints when I was 9 years old, at his workbench, tracing load lines with a carpenter's pencil. I became an engineer because of that man. Nearly 30 years later, he signed my name on a document I had never seen, so a stranger could buy the house my grandmother's land was holding up. But I'm getting ahead of the story. First, the email. Week 3 of a 5-week job. I was in Singapore consulting on a harbor terminal, the biggest contract our little firm had ever landed, and I woke at 4:47 to my phone glowing on the nightstand. One new email. From Mom. Subject line. Good news about Delia. I want you to read it the way I read it, in a dark hotel room in a country where it was already tomorrow. Margaret, your father and I have sold the beach house to settle your sister's debts. It's done, so please don't fuss. The buyers are lovely people and it all worked out. You didn't need it anyway, right? And then the postscript, my mother's signature move, the little bow on the box. Don't make this into a thing. Family handles family. I sat up. I read it again. I read it a third time, the way you recheck a load calculation that can't possibly say what it says. Sold. The beach house. Done. One short question, and every word of it had been true her whole life. Whatever Margaret has, Margaret can spare. I noticed my hands were perfectly steady, which frightened me more than shaking would have. I did not type a reply. There was no sentence to type that she would hear. It was 4:49 in the morning, which made it 4:49 in the afternoon on the coast of Maine, which meant offices were open, people were reachable, and things could still be done. My mother had sent an email and gone to bed feeling lighter. She was about to learn something about me that 20 years of quiet bailouts had hidden from her. I don't fuss. I file. I picked up the phone. And I did not call her. I called Ken. 5 in the evening his time. He was still on a job site in Portland. I read him the email once, flat, and there was a silence with machinery in it. And then my husband said the exact right thing, which is his particular genius. I'm driving out there. Stay on the phone. 40 minutes, Portland to Beacon Harbor, and I listened to that drive from the other side of the planet. Turn signal, gravel, gulls. Then his voice went low and careful. Meg, there's a consignment truck in the driveway, guys carrying boxes, and a locksmith's van. Somebody was drilling out my locks while my husband stood on my grandmother's land watching it happen. Ken doesn't yell. He got bigger instead. I could hear it, and told the crew chief to put down what he was holding, and the crew chief made a phone call, and through the little speaker of that phone across all those miles, I heard a voice I'd have known in a hurricane. My mother. Tinny. Bright. Absolutely certain. Tell them to keep working. It's a family house. A family house. Ken called 911 from the porch steps. Trespass, property dispute, officer dispatched. And that call, logged at 5:58 p.m., became the first official document in what the state of Maine would eventually call its case. I sat on a hotel bed in the dark doing the only thing I could from there, which was making a list, because lists are how I pray. Then Ken came back on, and his voice had a crack in it I'd only heard once before, at his father's funeral. Meg, your grandmother's hutch. It's already on the truck. Here's what I did from a hotel desk 9,000 miles away. Between site meetings, I still ran on no sleep because the terminal didn't care about my family. I filed a report with the Beacon Harbor Police Department online portal, attachments in order. I emailed the detective assigned, Alvarez, financial crimes. A package he later told me most victims take a month to assemble. The deed history, the LLC operating agreement, my credit freeze confirmations, and a letter dated August 2019. That letter is the part of this story I need you to hear, because it answers the question you're already asking. How does a grown woman get blindsided by her own parents and happen to have a folder ready? Because it wasn't the first time. In 2019, a credit alert pinged me at work. A $9,000 loan application, co-signed, my name on it, my social security number, my father's handwriting doing its best impression of mine. For Delia, of course. For a car after her second repossession, of course. I shut it down in 4 days. I confronted my dad, who stared at his boots. My mother's response was not an apology. It was a review of my performance. You embarrassed him over paperwork, Margaret. Family handles family. The family verdict came back that I had overreacted. So I did what overreacting engineers do. I stopped arguing and I redesigned the structure. Quietly, that fall, Ken and I made some changes they never asked about, because they had never once asked about my life. Only my liquidity. Detective Alvarez read the 2019 letter, then the rest of the folder, and replied within 2 hours. And his first sentence was the most beautiful thing a stranger has ever written to me. Mrs. Hale, I need you to verify a signature. The scan came through at midnight my time. A power of attorney, 1 page, notarized at a shipping store counter in Westbrook. Margaret Hale, in round, patient letters, granting her father full authority over her real property. Dated this spring. I sat very still and performed the strangest audit of my life, examining my own signature for fraud. And I recognized its skeleton immediately, the way you recognize a building you once stamped drawings for. In 2019, before the loan incident, back when I still said yes reflexively, I had signed my dad a real power of attorney. Limited scope, except the transfer of 1 small wooded lot while I was overseas for work. 90-day expiration. 1 parcel, 1 purpose. I keep copies of everything. I'm told it's a personality flaw. Side by side on my laptop, the 2 documents told the whole story. Same bones, my real signature photocopied forward into a new body. The date altered, the scope rewritten from 1 lot. 90 days into all real property, indefinitely. A dead permission slip, dug up and dressed in a suit. And the handwriting on the alterations was my father's. Of course it was. My dad is the only person alive who ever practiced my signature. For fun, when I was in college, forging my autograph on a napkin. For when you're famous, Meggie. I'd laughed. 20 years later, that party trick had a case number. Here's what I've learned about forged signatures since. There are 2 kinds. The greedy kind, and the kind done by people who have told themselves it isn't really forgery, because what's yours was always somehow the family's. The second kind is worse. The second kind comes with a clear conscience, and a clear conscience doesn't stop. I let 48 hours pass before I called my mother because I wanted my voice level and my questions short. She answered on the first ring, warm as a heating pad. "Sweetheart, so you got my email." I asked 3 questions, engineer's order. Who signed the paperwork? Where is the money? Where is Delia? And my mother, I'll give her this forever, did not lie to me. She narrated. The debt had gotten scary. Men had called the house about Delia. Actual men, actual calls. The Pine Point Casino had offered to close out her marker if 50,000 landed before Friday. The buyers had been found through Teddy Marsh. You remember Teddy? He sold the Hendersons' place, and the deposit had come through, and 50,000 of it had gone to Pine Point, wired, done, Delia safe. Your father and I did what had to be done. Someday you'll understand that. Not one syllable of apology anywhere in it. You can't apologize for weather, and in my mother's mind, this was weather. I asked my 4th question off script. Does Delia know how you got the money? 2 full seconds of silence, the longest I'd ever heard from her. Your sister doesn't need to be involved in paperwork. Involved in paperwork? My name, forged onto a legal instrument, had become paperwork, filed under things sensitive people shouldn't see. I said I'd be home in 2 weeks, and my mother, sensing something in my calm the way animals sense pressure change, went soft and coaxing, the voice she used to sing Fevers Down with. Come home, sweetheart. We'll sit around the table. Family handles family, Margaret. In the house, not in the street. She had no idea the street was already moving. I handed the terminal project to my second-in-command a week early. First time in my career I've done that. And the client shook my hand and said, family comes first, and I managed not to laugh in the man's face. 22 hours of flying. Ken met me at the Portland airport at midnight with coffee made the way I actually take it, and he didn't ask how I was, because he knew, and because he'd been busy. In the truck, dome light on, he handed me a clipboard. My husband courts me in clipboards, with an inventory, 3 columns in carpenter's pencil. Recovered. Pending. Gone. He had spent 4 days driving to consignment shops and estate liquidators with photos on his phone, buying back my grandmother's dining chairs, our books, the porch rockers, intercepting what he could before it scattered into other people's houses. Recovered was a long column. Pending was shorter. Gone had 11 lines, and I read them at a red light and made a sound I didn't plan to make, and my husband put his hand over mine on the clipboard and said, "We built it once. Hands remember." That's the whole speech he made. That's Ken. My family spent 20 years teaching me that love is a wire transfer with guilt attached, and this man builds his out of lists and gas mileage and buying back rocking chairs at 40% markup without a word of complaint. There's a lesson in that difference, and this story runs on it. On the seat between us sat a manila envelope, my name in unfamiliar print. Alvarez had left it that afternoon. Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Hale, the formal complaint. I held it in my lap the whole dark drive home, and it weighed nothing at all, and everything I had. Now I'll tell you the thing my parents didn't know. The thing I promised you at the start. After the 2019 loan stunt, I didn't yell. Yelling is for people who expect the other side to change. I re-engineered instead. That fall, on our lawyer's advice, Ken and I transferred Windward Cottage into a limited liability company. Hale Shoreline LLC, 2 members, Margaret and Kenneth Hale. Any sale, any mortgage, any transfer of that property required 2 member signatures. Both of us, in ink, together. We moved every scrap of property correspondence to a post office box in Portland. I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus. I documented the 2019 incident in a letter and had it notarized, not to punish my father. I never sent it anywhere, but because engineers keep records of the first crack. It's how you prove, later, that the collapse wasn't sudden. My mother would call all of this paranoid. It isn't paranoia. It's my profession. Nobody designs a bridge for the sunny day. You design for the worst load that will ever cross it, and I had watched the worst load rehearse. Here's what that paperwork meant in the spring of 2026. My parents had sold a house they had no legal power to sell. The forged power of attorney was written against Margaret Hale, private citizen. But Margaret Hale, private citizen, hadn't owned that cottage for 7 years. The deed said Hale Shoreline LLC, and the LLC said 2 signatures, and no title search on earth was going to miss it. Their sale wasn't just fraudulent, it was structurally impossible. A staircase drawn in the air. The only question left was who would tell them, me or the title company. I chose the title company. It has better timing. While I flew home, Detective Alvarez had been doing anatomy on the deal, and it deserves a minute, because every number in it tells you something about desperation. The buyers were a couple called the Corbins, cash buyers from Massachusetts, and they thought they'd found the deal of the decade. An oceanfront cottage appraised near $890,000, offered at $585. Below market by a country mile, the first red flag, and they swallowed it. Because a bargain makes people cooperative. They were in such a hurry to lock it down that they signed a release. My lawyer still reads out loud at parties. 10% down, $58,500, released directly to the sellers on signing. Not held in escrow. Released. In a normal deal, no one on earth agrees to that. In a rural deal brokered between friendly parties by a friendly agent, apparently you just initial the box. The agent was Teddy Marsh. 30 years of selling shore property, a man who'd known my parents since church picnics, which is exactly why he didn't look hard at a power of attorney handed to him by people he trusted. Within 36 hours of that deposit landing, $50,000 of it was wired to the Pine Point Casino to clear my sister's marker. Alvarez traced it in an afternoon. Money leaves footprints even when families don't. So set the board the way it stood that week. The Corbins believed they'd bought a cottage. Teddy believed he'd brokered one. My parents believed they'd saved a daughter and were telling the neighbors as much, with casseroles. And a title company in Beacon Harbor had a routine search on the calendar for Thursday morning. Thursday. Remember Thursday. Before Thursday, though, I had to walk through my own house, and I want to put you inside that hour, because burglary by strangers would have been kinder. The police had photographed everything. Alvarez met us with the key. My new key, for my new lock, on my own door. Half the house was gone, not ransacked. Worse, neatly gone, professionally gone, packed by men paid by the hour. Nail holes where our wedding photos hung. The dining room held its breath around a clean rectangle of unfaded floor where my grandmother's hutch had stood for 6 years. Bright squares on walls, felt pads with no furniture over them. A house turned into an inventory of shapes. I called my mother that night about one thing only, the hutch, because Ken's consignment shop hunt hadn't found it yet, and I kept my voice in the range I use for building inspectors. Her answer came back so easily I understood she'd had it ready for years, a sentence just waiting for its occasion. She had 2, Margaret. You have a whole house. She had 2. My grandmother, who fed 4 children out of that hutch through 2 recessions, had owned 2 pieces of good furniture, and therefore, I was greedy for grieving one. That's the arithmetic my mother runs the world on. Whatever the responsible child has is a surplus. Whatever the drowning child needs is a debt everyone owes. I hung up politely. I've been polite my whole life. It's load-bearing. Then Ken called me to the staircase and I stood at the bottom and looked at what the movers had started and not finished, and something in my chest went off plumb. The newel post. Our newel post. M and K carved deep. Half unbolted, tagged, in grease pencil as a fixture for handover. The family meeting happened at my parents' house in Westbrook that Sunday, and I went, on Alvarez's advice. Keep the channel open, let them talk. And, if I'm honest, because some 38-year-old muscle in me still walked toward that table when called. They were all deployed, Mom at the head, Dad beside her studying his knuckles, Aunt Petra flanking, coffee cake in the center like a white flag. No Delia. Your sister's fragile right now, my mother said, which answered a question I hadn't asked yet. Then came the presentation, because it was a presentation. The family would make this right. A payment plan, something reasonable, monthly, once things settled. In exchange, I would call that nice detective and tell him it was all a misunderstanding. The Word did a lot of cargo work that afternoon, and we would handle it where it belonged, in the house. And then my mother folded her hands and delivered her law, the one I was raised under, the one that has a casserole for every occasion. This family doesn't let family drown. Around the table, heads nodded like the verse had ended. I looked at the coffee cake. I did the math I do. A payment plan out of what? I asked. You're retired. Dad's pension is fixed. The deposit's gone to Pine Point. Pay me back with what? The silence lasted long enough to hear the kitchen clock, because we both knew the answer. With the next thing. There is always a next thing, until the responsible child runs out of things. My mother's eyes went to the window, to the yard, to the house itself around us, and I watched her not say it. I stood, thanked Petra for the cake, and left before my face could file a report of its own. That evening, I drove out to the cottage alone and sat on the third stair. The stair Ken and I spent one entire August getting right. Stringers recut twice because I wouldn't accept a squeak. And I put my hand on the half-unbolted newel post. 2 lag bolts loose, 2 holding. Our initials tilted a few degrees off true, catching my flashlight at a wrong angle, M and K, leaning like something on a sinking ship. Somebody had been paid by the hour to start removing the exact object my husband made to say we happened. And sitting there in a coat in my own cold house, I finally saw my own blueprint clearly. My whole life, every crisis, I had run the same calculation. How do I engineer a fix where I save everyone? Delia from the debt, Dad from the shame, Mom from the neighbors, the family from the truth. Everyone. Every time. Except the woman doing the math. That's not love. That's what my mother's law had made of me. Not a daughter. A load-bearing wall nobody thanks until it's removed. In the morning, I drove to the Beacon Harbor Police Department and sat in the rental car for 20 minutes, watching a man walk a beagle past the flagpole like the world was ordinary. Then I went inside and signed the criminal complaint. My real signature, the one with 38 years of my hand in it, on the one document in this whole mess that told the truth. Alvarez notarized it without ceremony, which I appreciated. Some things you want done like plumbing. Here's what I knew as the pen lifted. Certain bolts, once backed out, never bite the same threads again. I had just become, permanently, the daughter who called the police on her parents. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel, and the old life stripped behind me like a thread giving way. Let me pause right here. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and pressing charges, between being the good daughter and being a whole person, tell me in the comments what you chose and what it cost. I read every single one. And subscribe, because the phone call that blew this whole thing open is about 2 minutes away. Thursday, 11:40 in the morning. I know the timeline the way you know a verse, because I heard it twice under oath and once across a kitchen table. The title company ran its routine search on Windward Cottage, and the file came back the way a bridge inspection comes back when someone's been selling a bridge they don't own. Record owner, Hale Shoreline, LLC. Transfer authority. 2 member signatures required. Documents submitted. A power of attorney executed by Margaret Hale, private individual. Legally, a key to a door that had been replaced 7 years ago. The deal didn't wobble. It died on the table. The title officer called Teddy Marsh, and Teddy, 30 years in shore property, understood in one sentence what he was holding and what he had passed along to buyers with his name on it. He sat in his car in the office lot for a while. He told me this himself, later over terrible diner coffee. And then he dialed my parents' landline, because some conversations you don't have by text. My mother answered. She put it on speaker. Her hands, she testified later, weren't behaving. And Teddy Marsh, family friend, church picnic Teddy, said the sentences that ended the misunderstanding era of this story. Lois, the sale's dead. The house isn't yours to sell. It isn't even Margaret's personally. It's an LLC, has been for years. And Lois, I have to ask you the question the title office just asked me, and I need you to think hard before you answer it. Who signed this power of attorney? On the other end of that line, in the kitchen where I learned to read blueprints, there was a silence. And then, faintly, the sound of my father being sick in the sink. What happened next happened the way structures fail. Quietly, in paperwork, all at once. The Corbins wanted their $58,500 back. Reasonably, loudly. It wasn't there. 50 of it lived in a casino's ledger now, and casinos are not known for refunds. So the Corbins hired a lawyer, and the lawyer sent the kind of letter that gets forwarded to detectives. Teddy Marsh, protecting the license he'd held for 30 years, filed a full report with the State Real Estate Commission. Every document, every date, every conversation, and copied the police, which meant the file on Alvarez's desk assembled itself like a barn-raising, forgery of a legal instrument, theft by deception. The words stopped being mine and became the state of Maine's, printed under a seal, and I learned something nobody tells you about justice. Once you hand truth to a process, the process doesn't check with your feelings before it walks. My parents went from sellers to subjects inside of a week. A detective photographed the shipping store notary log. A handwriting examiner got a subpoena and my 2019 folder. The neighbors who'd gotten casseroles now got curious. And me? I did nothing. That's the part my family never believed afterward. That I wasn't pulling levers, wasn't calling in favors, wasn't orchestrating. I had signed one true document and stepped back, and consequences my parents had outrun for 20 years finally arrived under their own power, punctual as tide. The night the Corbins' lawyer's letter landed, my phone lit up on the workbench. 14 missed calls from Mom, spread over 4 hours, each one a little shorter. And beneath them, one text from my sister, Delia. First contact in months. No greeting, just one blunt line. What did you do? The family group chat is called Hail Family, and for 11 years it carried birthday reminders and casserole logistics. And in 1 week it became a courtroom where I was the defendant and everyone got a robe. Screenshots reached me even after I muted it. She called the police on her own parents, over paperwork. They're in their 70s. Near enough, apparently. Who raised her? The woman who forged my signature raised me. I did not reply. And then Aunt Petra came to Portland. I want to be fair to Petra, because she is not a villain. She is what the system looks like when it's worried. She stood on my porch with a tin of molasses cookies and cried before I got the door fully open. Maggie, withdraw the complaint. They're old. Your mother doesn't sleep. Whatever this is, the family can settle it in the house. We always settle it in the house. I brought her in. I made tea. I listened to every word all the way to the bottom, because she'd earned that over 40 years of being kind to me. And when she finally wound down into dabbing her eyes, I said the only thing I had. Petra, in the house is where this was raised. 20 years of settling it in the house is how a $9,000 loan became a forged deed. The house doesn't settle things. The house buries them under the floor and calls the lump a rug. She left unhappy, cookies unclaimed, and I stood in my kitchen listening to the refrigerator and understanding the price sheet clearly. I could be right, or I could be invited. Not both. Not this year. That night, my phone rang again. Delia. And for the first time in longer than I can defend, I answered my sister. She sounded wrecked, and she sounded real, which with Delia had become 2 different measurements years ago. She swore she hadn't known about the power of attorney, and here's the strange part. I believed her, and it didn't help. I asked for help, Meg. Mom said she'd handle it. I didn't ask how. I didn't ask how. There it is. The whole engine of my family in one sentence. My sister is not stupid. She'd watched 20 years of rescues arrive from nowhere, rent handled, cars replaced, markers cleared, and she had learned the one skill that kept the machine comfortable. Don't ask how. Ignorance in that house wasn't innocence. It was a subscription. She begged me to drop the complaint, for Mom and Dad's sake, and halfway through the begging she started crying differently, lower, and told me the truth I suspect no one else had gotten yet. The betting apps were still on her phone. That night, during this, she'd deleted them twice, and reinstalled them twice, and there was a parlay running on a West Coast game as we spoke. I closed my eyes and did not perform surprise. "I'm not withdrawing it," I said gently, "the way you report bad soil under a foundation. And Delia, I'm done paying for damage, but I'll pay for one thing, once, if you want it. Treatment. A real program. I write the check to them, never to you. One offer. It doesn't keep." Silence. The longest of our adult lives. Then my little sister, 34 years old, said the first fully honest sentence I'd heard from her in a decade. "I don't know if I can want it yet." That I could work with. Wreckage is honest. It's the rescue that lies. My father asked to meet at the diner by Ken's job site, and he brought his toolbox in from the truck, which broke my heart before he said a word. My dad carries that toolbox the way other men carry flowers, an offering, a white flag, a language. He's 68. He looked 80. He didn't touch his eggs, and he told me a story I'd only ever had the outline of. My mother, 12 years old, 1972. Her father's dairy farm went under. Not from drink, not from laziness, just prices and weather and a bank with a schedule. And the town that had bought that man's milk for 20 years looked away, all at once, in unison, like a drill they'd practiced. The church said it would pray. The neighbors said nothing at all. Lois wore her cousin's hand-me-down coat for 2 winters, and heard about it at school for 2 winters, and stood next to her father at the auction while men he'd fed bid coins on his equipment. Your mother made a vow, Meg, standing right there, 12 years old. This family doesn't let family drown. You've heard it your whole life and rolled your eyes at it, and I understand. But you have to know what it is. It isn't a rule for her. It's a scar. He turned his coffee cup a slow half circle. That paper I signed, I knew. Some part of me knew. But your mother looked at me like the water was rising, and I've never once been able to stand on the shore. Then he looked up with those wet mechanic's eyes and said, "So, you'll withdraw it, won't you?" And I understood that even this, the truest hour my father ever gave me, had arrived with an invoice. The district attorney's office moved faster than family. By September, there was a plea framework on the table. Both parents plead to forgery of a legal instrument and theft by deception. The state would recommend within a range, anything from probation to 5 years. And 2 things would weigh the outcome more than anything else: full restitution and the victim impact statement. Mine. Alvarez explained it in his flat, kind way. "The judge will want to know what you want, Mrs. Hale. It matters. Sometimes it decides." So of course my mother called. And of course she had done her reading, because my mother has never once entered a negotiation unprepared. Her voice was the softest I'd heard it since childhood fevers. "The lawyer says if you ask for leniency, there's no prison. So you'll ask, sweetheart. You'll ask for probation, and restitution can be arranged, over time, and then..." And here it came, the sentence the whole call had been scaffolding for. "And then everything can go back to how it was." Back to how it was. I stood at my drafting table looking at a load diagram while she talked, and I finally saw the design flaw I'd been living inside. How it was the disease. How it was me as the reserve tank, Delia as the leak, Dad as the gasket, Mom as the operator's manual. She wasn't asking me to save her from prison. She was asking me to recertify the structure that had just failed and crushed everyone under it. "This family doesn't let family drown," she added quietly, the old law, the scar doing the talking. "I'll see you Tuesday, Mom," I said. Alvarez called an hour later. "Hearing's Tuesday. Are you speaking?" I looked at the blank legal pad in front of me. "I'm writing." I wrote the statement at our kitchen table over 3 nights, and the wastebasket got the first 2 versions. Draft 1 was 4 pages of indictment. Every bailout since 2006, itemized, dated, weaponized, eloquent as a collapsing crane. I read it out loud to the empty kitchen and heard the voice it was written in, and the voice was my mother's. Leverage, guilt. The ledger swung like a bat. I tore it up. If the cure runs on the same fuel as the disease, it isn't a cure. It's a franchise. Draft 2 swung the other way. 2 paragraphs of mercy, no conditions. Let the judge sort it out. Keep the peace. And somewhere under its reasonable sentences, I could hear, back to how it was, humming like a bad bearing. Tore that one, too. I was sitting there at midnight with a blank third page when Ken came down in his socks, read the confetti in the basket without comment, and put one hand flat on the empty pad, his palm covering most of it. My husband is not a man of speeches, he's a man of specifications. Write the thing you could still sign in 10 years, he said. Not the angriest thing, not the nicest thing, the one that holds. Then he made 2 cups of decaf and sat with me, not reading over my shoulder. Just there, a counterweight, while I found out what I actually wanted, which is the hardest engineering problem I have ever been assigned. At 2 a.m, I wrote the opening line, and my hands were steady, and I knew it was the true draft because it frightened me. Your Honor, I am not here to ask for prison. The night before the hearing, we drove out to the cottage, Ken and I, and slept in sleeping bags on the living room floor, the way we did in 2016 when the place was studs and tarp and one working outlet. Half the furniture was still missing. The rooms had that swept clean echo. It was, I want this on the record, a good night. Ken walked the floor in his socks, pointing out history like a museum docent with sawdust in his blood. The plank we flipped to hide the knot. The window we reframed twice because the first crew botched the flashing. The pencil line inside the closet doorway where he'd marked my height as a joke. And then his own. And then, years later, nothing else. Because we never got around to children and the wall stopped keeping score. We built it once, he said, laying his hand on the wall the way some men check a horse. Hands remember. In the morning, I put on the gray blazer I wear to zoning boards. The armor of a woman who intends to be believed and not pitied. And at the door, on an impulse I didn't examine, I went to the staircase and took one of the loose lag bolts from the newel post, the post still tilted, still waiting, and put it in my blazer pocket. Engineers need talismans too. We just prefer ours rated for sheer. The county courthouse lot was half full when we pulled in at 8:40. The Haleside had arrived early. 2 rows of them, hats and Sunday coats, Aunt Petra at the aisle. Every face I'd known my whole life turned to watch me walk in, and not one of them said my name. Courtrooms are quieter than television tells you. Mostly it's paper sounds, and a clerk's stapler, and the particular acoustics of people trying not to be heard breathing. My parents sat at the defense table in clothes I recognized from Easter, and when the judge asked, "How do you plead?" my father said guilty in a voice like a dropped tool, and my mother said it clearly, chin level, a woman paying a toll she still believed the road had no right to charge. The prosecutor walked the money. The altered power of attorney on the screen, my real 2019 signature beside its photocopied ghost, the deposit, the wire to Pine Point, time-stamped 36 hours after the Corbins signed. The defense attorney spoke of restitution being arranged by the family, and I watched the judge's eyebrow do what mine does when a contractor says the beam is probably fine. And then the judge shuffled one page and said the sentence I'd been carrying like a load rating for a month. The court understands the victim wishes to be heard. The room turned. All of it. The Sunday coats. My aunt. My mother's neck going rigid. My father closing his eyes. And in the very back row, arrived silently in a coat too thin for October, my sister. Delia came. Nobody had told me that. I stood up, and the bolt in my blazer pocket knocked once against my rib like a knuckle on a door, and I walked to the little podium that faces the bench, and I unfolded 2 pages I could sign in 10 years. The paper didn't shake. I'd engineered it not to. Before I tell you what I said, one honest question, from my kitchen to yours. If it were your parents at that table, and your name on that forged line, prison, mercy, or something else entirely, put it in the comments. I want to know. Because what I asked that judge for, nobody in the courtroom saw coming, least of all my mother. I began with the damage, because I'm an engineer and we start with the loads. I kept my voice in inspection range. Even, specific, no adjectives. 6 years of weekends, I told the court, framed and wired and shingled by the two people who own it. $58,500 taken from buyers who did nothing worse than trust a familiar name. $26,400 in locks, recovery costs, and legal fees. A China hutch that fed 4 children through 2 recessions, sold on consignment for a fraction of its history. A hand-carved newel post, tagged in grease pencil, half unbolted by strangers paid by the hour. And one item, I said, that doesn't appraise. From now on, when I see my own signature, I check it. I audit my own name. The defendants did that, and no restitution schedule returns it. The room was still enough to hear the clerk's chair. My mother watched the table. My father watched me and took it, which I noted, and will remember. Then I turned the page and I heard 2 rows of Sunday coats lean forward half an inch, waiting for the part they'd come for. The daughter asking mercy, the family restored. The lump swept back under the rug where it belongs, and I gave them the first sentence of the ending I'd designed instead. Your Honor, I am not here to ask for prison. Behind me, distinctly, my mother exhaled, and in the half-second before I spoke again, I watched her shoulders come down, and I recognized the posture. Relief. Triumph. Even. The old structure, certain it had held one more time. But, I said, I am not here to ask for nothing. And I read the court my 3 conditions in order, the way you read a spec. 1. Full restitution. Every dollar to the Corbins, every documented dollar of damage, on a schedule with teeth, even if satisfying it requires the defendants to sell their own home. I paused there because I owed the room the honesty of the price tag. That is the house I grew up in, Your Honor. I learned to read blueprints at a workbench in its garage. I am asking you to order it sold if that's what restitution takes, and I want the record to show I understand exactly what I'm asking, and that I am asking anyway. 2. Probation in place of prison, with a standing condition barring both defendants from executing any document, any account, any transaction in another person's name, supervised, for the full term. 3. That any leniency shown to my parents be conditioned on my sister entering a certified treatment program for gambling addiction, because the debt was never the disease, and the court shouldn't fix the paperwork while the leak that flooded it keeps running. Then I folded my pages and said the last part to the judge, but not only to him. Your Honor, my family has a saying, this family doesn't let family drown. And we never did. We kept pulling my sister out of the water every time, so she never once had to learn to swim. Today I'm retiring as the lifeguard. Mercy, yes. A rope, no. That's the whole of what I'm asking. I sat down to no applause, because courtrooms don't clap, and heard my mother rise behind me. Margaret. One word, cracked clean down the middle, and the gavel came down on it, not unkindly, the way you'd close a door on weather. She caught me in the hallway by the water fountain, and for the first time in my life, my mother stood in front of me with no script whatsoever. What was left was smaller and realer, and it went straight for the wound. You're making me lose my house. I kept my voice where it had been all morning. No, Mom. A forged signature is making you lose your house. I just declined to pay the ransom for the 20th time. Her face worked. She reached for anger and found it empty, reached for the law. Family doesn't. And heard how it sounded in a courthouse, and dropped it. What came out last was the true thing, the thing under 50 years of casseroles and vows. Her eyes filled and her voice went young. Respectable is all I ever had, Margaret, since I was 12 years old. You don't know. I do, I said, and it stopped her. The coat. 2 winters. Dad told me. The color left her face. Not shame at the forgery. I'd stopped expecting that. Shame at being seen. You survived a town that let your father drown in front of you, I said quietly, because a hallway is not a bench, and I wasn't sentencing her. You built a whole religion so it would never happen again. Mom, I'm not the town. I was never the town, but I'm done being the vault. I lifted her hand off my sleeve the way I do it now. Gently. A quarter turn. Done. Aunt Petra stood by the doors as I came through, and she stepped aside. And then, so small I nearly missed it, she nodded. Once. First vote of a hung jury. And behind me, down the corridor, my sister's voice, thin but standing. Meg, that offer. Does it still keep? The court took my framework nearly whole. 4 years probation for each of them. Restitution ordered in full. $58,500 to the Corbins, $26,400 to us. On a schedule the defense called aggressive and the judge called overdue. A standing prohibition on either defendant signing, transacting, or notarizing anything in another person's name for the duration. The Westbrook house went on the market inside the month. I drove past it once when the sign went up, and I made myself look, because I'd asked for it and grief you order should be grief you attend. It sold to a young family in 19 days. As for Delia, she took the offer in the courthouse corridor with her coat still on, before it could stop keeping. I wrote the check the way I'd said I would, directly to the program, never through her hands, and I drove her to intake myself on a gray Tuesday, and we didn't play music, and at the door she said, I keep waiting for you to say I told you so. And I said, I retired. That was the lifeguard's line. She laughed and cried in the same breath and went in. The family group chat spent a season dividing over me and then, like every structure loaded past its interest span, quietly stopped. Casseroles found other addresses, and one evening in November, Ken came up the cottage drive with something in the truck bed under a moving blanket, wearing the studied casual of a man who has been sitting on a secret. He'd been running his photo hunt the whole time, shop to shop, week after week. In a consignment barn 40 miles inland he'd found her. My grandmother's hutch, tagged $900, receipt annotated in ballpoint by a clerk who had no idea what they were writing. Prior owner sold in a hurry. We carried it in together, one of us at each end, the way you carry the past if you're lucky. The night after the sentencing paperwork cleared, we drove out to the cottage with Chinese takeout and Ken's good socket set, and I did the thing I'd been saving the way other people save champagne. I knelt at the bottom of the staircase with my husband holding the light, and I rebolted the newel post. Our newel post. My own hands on the ratchet, 2 lag bolts seated back into fresh plugged holes, torqued to spec, because of course, to spec. The M and the K came back to plumb under the work light, straight as the day he carved them. I sat back on my heels and looked at it, and the sentence I'd been circling for 20 years finally assembled itself, and I said it out loud to the man in the staircase. One time, for the record. I spent 20 years being this family's insurance policy. Today I filed my resignation, and it turns out I did need this place. Not the walls. The line. You didn't need it anyway, right? That was the question, remember. One line, 5 a.m, Singapore. Here's the answer it took me a courtroom to write. I needed it the way a bridge needs its rated limit posted where everyone can read it. Not to keep people off. To keep the thing standing so people can cross for another 50 years. Ken handed me my lo mein and tapped his paper cup against mine, and we ate on the 3rd stair. The stair that took a whole August, under a house that was quiet in the specific way a structure is quiet when, at last, every load is sitting on the member designed to carry it. Aftermath, measured, because I don't deal in miracles and neither should stories like mine. My parents live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Westbrook now. The restitution draws run on time. Alvarez tells me compliance officers rarely see schedules kept this cleanly, and I believe it, because my mother has never once been late on a payment to appearances. She tells her neighbors there was a misunderstanding about paperwork, all resolved. The vow didn't die in that courtroom. Vows like hers don't die. They just lose their line of credit. My father sends me things instead of words, which is the only language he's ever been fluent in. A magazine clipping of the Singapore terminal with my firm's name in the caption, folded once, no note. A socket that matches the set Ken lost. I keep them in a drawer I think of as correspondence. Delia finished the program and stayed with it, GA on Thursdays in a church basement that smells, she says, like burnt coffee and second chances. 14 months now. Last month my phone buzzed and it was a photograph. No caption, No text. Her 1-year chip, held in an open palm, slightly out of focus. I didn't reply with a speech. I replied with a thumbs up, because recovering people can smell a lifeguard at 100 yards, and I'm retired. Am I calling any of this a happy ending? I'm an engineer. I don't certify a new structure until it's stood through a storm season, and we've had exactly one calm year. But I'll say this into the record. The loads are finally sitting on the right members. The vault is closed. The daughter, against several odds, is still here. And the cottage, the thing they said I didn't need, found its third life. Last summer, we started something Ken named Windward Weeks, because he names things the way he builds them, plainly and to last. 6 weeks a season, we hand the keys to families like the one I grew up in without knowing it. People with someone in recovery, people worn transparent from being the responsible one. No program, no speeches. A week on the bluff, the tide doing its work. My grandmother's hutch back in its corner stacked with dishes for strangers, which is exactly the job that hutch was built for. On the newel post, under the M and K, Ken carved one more line in letters the size of a caption: Rebuilt, 2026. People trace it with a thumb and ask. We mostly let the stairs answer. In August, one of our guest mothers, 3 teenagers, a husband 8 months sober, eyes like mine used to be, found me watering the porch boxes and asked the question straight out. Why would you do this for people you don't know? I gave her the truest answer I own, the one that took a forged signature, a dead sale, and a courtroom to earn. Because I know how to swim, I told her, and I finally remembered who paid for the lessons. She looked at me a long second, and then she laughed, and the tide came in the way it does, on schedule, asking nobody's permission, needing nobody's rescue. I'm Margaret Hale, 39 now, and this spring my mother sent a birthday card with nothing extra written in it, and I put it on the windowsill, because a boundary is a wall with a mail slot, not a moat. If you take one thing from my story, take this. Loving your family doesn't mean underwriting their worst decisions. Sometimes the kindest thing a lifeguard can do is teach, and then get out of the water. If this story stayed with you, the one-line email, the phone call that killed a fraudulent sale in one sentence, the sister who retired as the lifeguard in open court, share it with someone who has always been the responsible one. They'll know why. And if you believe a boundary can be an act of love, subscribe to. Every week, another quiet woman finds her voice here. Next week, it might sound like yours.